At the family dinner, a powerful relative publicly tore up my job application and mocked my mother as a parasite on society. Just as my mother was in tears and the villain was laughing triumphantly, Victoria, dressed in a haute couture gown, walked in, acquired the family company that had mocked me in front of everyone, and kicked the villain out, coldly declaring, "My man is someone only I can bully. Who do you think you are? Come to my channel. If you love the story, don't forget to subscribe." Late autumn in Boston is always accompanied by a damp, chilly wind from the Atlantic Ocean, which feels like a knife cutting into your face. I sat on the top floor of the Vanderbilt Capitol Tower, towering into the clouds in the financial district, my leather swivel chair creaking slightly. Outside, the floor-to-ceiling windows stretched a dense array of Boston skyscrapers, and my mood was as gloomy as the weather. Sitting opposite me was Victoria Vanderbilt, the founder and CEO of this asset management firm, 20 years old. She possessed the ruthless methods to stir up trouble on Wall Street. At this moment, she was looking down at a quarterly financial report, not even lifting her eyelids. Her impeccably tailored black Prada suit accentuated her cool and aloof demeanor. The collar was slightly open, revealing her graceful swan neck. The office was so quiet that the only sound was the rustling of her long, slender fingers turning the pages. "Mr. Taylor Stern." Victoria finally stopped what she was doing, raised her sharp, hawk-like gray-blue eyes, and stared straight at me. "As far as I know, you are just a low-level risk assessment analyst in my company. Did you specifically schedule a private time with me today just to discuss the $2 million your team lost last week?" I took a deep breath and placed my hands on the mahogany desk. I didn't back down. Meeting her penetrating gaze, I said in a deep voice, "Ms. Victoria, that loss wasn't due to a mistake in my model. Rather, it was because Vice President Blake deliberately altered the final data entry in an attempt to sideline me. I believe you are well aware of this." Victoria sneered, a mocking smile playing on her lips. "Oh, workplace infighting happens every day. If you don't even have this much resilience, you can go to HR tomorrow, collect your check, and leave. Wall Street doesn't keep useless people." "Stern, I'm not here to complain," I said, looking directly at her, my tone calm yet firm. "Ms. Victoria, I'm here today to make a deal." She raised an eyebrow, seemingly slightly surprised by my audacity. "Trading? What right does a low-level analyst who could be fired at any moment have to talk to me about trading? I can help you avoid that $30 million hidden debt trap in next month's energy sector merger," I said, enunciating each word with an undeniable confidence. "And my request is simple. Ms. Victoria, do me a favor by playing my girlfriend and handling my family dinner tonight." The air in the office seemed to freeze for a few seconds. Victoria narrowed her eyes slightly, re-examining the young man before her, who was dressed plainly but had a pair of deep, eagle-like eyes. She clearly hadn't expected a low-level employee to make such an absurd and audacious request. "Taylor, are you challenging my intelligence?" Victoria's voice turned cold, and an invisible pressure from someone in a high position instantly enveloped the entire room. "You expect me, a CEO of Wall Street, to pretend to be the girlfriend of some nobody like you? To attend dinners with your ordinary families? What makes you think you're qualified? You desperately need to tap into the Texas shale oil market, and only I can uncover that hidden debt through non-public data models." I met her gaze without flinching, leaning slightly forward. "Blake has been obstructing your access to this crucial data because he has ties to sellers in Texas. If you help me this time, you can not only legitimately remove Blake's influence in the company, but also secure that acquisition at minimal cost. This deal is a guaranteed win for you." Victoria's gaze changed. The initial mockery and coldness gradually faded, replaced by scrutiny and inquiry. She picked up the black coffee on the table, took a small sip, and her red lips contrasted sharply with the black liquid. "Well done, Taylor Stern," Victoria said, setting down her coffee cup with a crisp sound. "You're not just an analyst. You're a complete gambler. But why should I believe you can find that debt trap? Based on the fact that I checked 30 bankruptcy liquidation files all night yesterday." I pulled a thick document from my briefcase and slammed it on her desk. "This is the simulation model I made overnight. Ms. Victoria, you can spend 10 minutes looking at the first 3 pages now. If it doesn't make you break out in a cold sweat, I'll resign immediately and won't bother you anymore." Victoria picked up the document with suspicion. At first, she seemed unconcerned, but as she turned the pages faster, her brow furrowed, and a hint of shock flashed in her eyes. As a top trader on Wall Street, she could immediately tell the value of this data model. It was something no ordinary analyst could have created, and it even contained some extremely confidential analysis of overseas trusts. The office fell into a deathly silence, with only the faint hum of the air conditioner vents. About 8 minutes later, Victoria slowly closed the file and looked up at me. Her gaze completely changed. She had abandoned her condescending arrogance, replacing it with the interest of someone watching prey. "You've been hiding your true colors, Taylor." Victoria leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "That idiot Blake always thought you were an easy target, but he didn't know you were a venomous snake lurking in the shadows. You flatter me, Ms. Victoria. In a place like Boston, Anyone who doesn't hide their talents would have been wiped out long ago, I replied casually. Okay. Victoria stood up, her long legs accentuating her figure in her business skirt. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, her back to me as she looked at the bustling traffic outside. I agreed to the family dinner tonight. But remember, now that I'm your girlfriend, I hold the reins in this game. If I find out you're up to something. She whirled around, her eyes sharp as knives. I'll make you disappear from the entire financial world. Deal, I answered without hesitation. However, Victoria changed the subject, a meaningful smile playing on her lips. If we're going to put on an act, we should make it convincing. Before going out tonight, I need to establish enough authority for myself as your good girlfriend within your family. Otherwise, how can I justify your ingenious debt model? Looking at the ambiguous smile on her face, my heart skipped a beat. I had a feeling that this decisive and efficient female CEO was harboring something far more sinister. But right now, I had no way out. To escape the entanglement of those snobbish relatives and to completely defeat Blake in the upcoming workplace power struggles, I had no choice but to dance with the wolf. Suit yourself, I replied coldly. Just don't make things too ugly. Ugly? No, Taylor. Victoria picked up her phone from the table, the screen illuminating her exquisite, aloof face. I've always been the one who makes others look ugly. Looking at her confident demeanor, I realized for the first time that this seemingly cold and ruthless woman might be far more dangerous than I had imagined. But this danger was precisely the weapon I desperately needed, given my current predicament. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Boston's evening rush hour turned the city's roads into a frozen, metallic dragon. I sat in the back seat of a taxi, watching the street scene rushing past the window, when my phone suddenly vibrated with a crisp notification sound. I frowned, took out my phone, and opened it. It was a WeChat message from my mother, Martha. A photo was prominently displayed in the message box. The background was clearly an extremely luxurious private office, with the iconic Boston Financial District skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Standing in the center of the image was a woman, Victoria. She wore her signature black suit, arms crossed, her gaze cold and haughty, exuding a queenly air of looking down upon all. Immediately afterward, voice messages from my mother came in quick succession. I opened the message, and her voice, filled with deep anxiety and shock, came through. Taylor? What? What's going on? This Miss Victoria just suddenly added me on WeChat, sent me this photo, and left a message saying she's your girlfriend now. Son, tell me honestly, have you offended some big shot outside? She's the president of a big corporation. How could you? My mother's voice was filled with unease and fear. In her mind, our family was just an ordinary working-class family in the suburbs of Boston. My father had passed away early, and my mother had raised me alone by working as a cashier in a supermarket. Victoria, on the other hand, was a household name in Boston's business world. She was a high-ranking tycoon. My mother simply couldn't believe that such a woman, so high and mighty, would suddenly become involved with her son, whom she had no connection with whatsoever, and even go so far as to release private photos to assert her dominance. I stared at Victoria's stunningly beautiful face on my phone screen and nearly coughed up blood. That crazy woman. This afternoon, I was talking to her about hidden debts and business cooperation. She only agreed to pretend to be my girlfriend to appease the family dinner tonight. But instead, she's dragged the conflict into my mother's life. This isn't pretending to be a girlfriend. It's like she's trying to make things worse by throwing a nuclear weapon into my living room. Just as I was about to call back to explain to my mother, a new message popped up on my phone screen. Sent by Victoria. Mr. Taylor, don't be nervous. The text was even accompanied by a rare, ambiguous smiley emoji. Since we're going to put on an act tonight, we should start by building trust with the elders. If I don't reveal my identity beforehand, won't your so-called snobbish relatives stomp your face into the carpet tonight? I'm just helping people out to the end. You're welcome. Seeing this message made me furious. This woman seemed to be helping me, but in reality, she was using this absolutely forceful approach to take control and completely dominate the whole situation. She not only accurately predicted my family situation, but also calculated my every move. What nonsense are you talking about? My mom has a heart condition. What if something happens to her if you directly provoke her like this? I immediately replied with a string of text messages, my tone filled with undisguised anger. Less than 3 seconds later, Victoria called directly. I pressed the answer button, and before I could even speak, her signature cool voice came through the receiver, tinged with an undeniable sarcasm. Taylor, if you can't even handle this little emergency, then that debt model you gave me this afternoon is probably just empty talk. Listen, I've already had a brief chat with your aunt. She's a very kind person, and she's quite satisfied with me. Now, get out of the car right now, and we'll meet at the street corner downstairs. If you dare to be even a minute late, tonight's show is cancelled. And you'd better be prepared to face your awful relatives alone. After I finished speaking, the phone went dead. I held my phone, the veins on my forehead throbbing slightly. This woman exuded an air of domineering arrogance, leaving no room for anyone to refuse. But she was right. Tonight's family dinner was a trap. If I couldn't even handle Victoria, I would only suffer a more crushing defeat at the dinner table. Facing my mean-spirited uncles and elders, the taxi slowly pulled up in front of my apartment building. It was an old apartment building, with withered ivy climbing all over the red brick walls. Compared to the skyscraper in Victoria, it was like a completely different world. I pushed open the car door and stepped out. The chill of late autumn instantly rushed into my collar, making me shiver. Under the streetlight at the corner, a black Rolls-Royce Phantom stood out conspicuously in the dimly lit street. Leaning against the car door was a tall figure. It was Victoria. She had changed into a white cashmere coat. Its fitted cut perfectly accentuated her figure. Her slightly wavy long hair swayed gently in the wind, exuding a cool and alluring charm that was impossible to look away from. Several middle-aged women from the neighborhood were carrying shopping bags, their eyes fixed on the luxury car and the stunning woman beside it. Their mouths were agape as they whispered among themselves about when such an important person had moved into this dilapidated apartment building. I walked over with a dark expression, looking at her irritably. "Ms. Victoria, are you making such a big show of things because you're afraid my relatives won't know I've hooked up with a rich guy?" Victoria turned her head, a hint of mockery flashing in her gray-blue eyes. She looked me up and down, a faint smile curving her lips. "Taylor, broaden your perspective. This isn't about marrying a rich man. It's about overwhelming him. Tonight, I'm going to make everyone who ever looked down on you swallow their words." "What exactly did you say to my mom?" I lowered my voice, my tone carrying a hint of accusation. "I didn't say anything. I just told her that I'm the woman you've chosen, and that I'll be taking you home for dinner tonight," Victoria said without changing her expression. Then, she naturally reached out her slender arm and took my arm in hers. In that instant, a faint scent of cedar perfume wafted into my nostrils. My body stiffened slightly, and I instinctively tried to pull my hand away, but she held it tightly. Although her hand was through a thick coat, the warmth of her body was exceptionally clear. "Don't move." Victoria leaned close to my ear, her warm breath brushing against my earlobe, but her voice was as cold as ice. "From now on, I am your fiancé. If you don't want to ruin everything, you'd better cooperate with me obediently." Seeing her determined look, I took a deep breath and forcibly suppressed my frustration. Since this icy female CEO insisted on jumping into this quagmire, I'd use her as a sharp blade to deal with my vampire-like relatives. "Fine." I grabbed her wrist in return, a cold glint in my eyes. "Since you want to play, then tonight I'll play big with you. I hope your noble and aloof mentality will hold up until the end at the dinner table." Victoria sneered and turned around first, her high heels clicking on the floor. "Let's go, Mr. Taylor. Let me see what kind of awful family could raise an analyst like you." Full of malice, we walked side by side into the apartment building. The dim lights in the hallway flickered on and off, and the air was filled with the smell of old wood and cooking fumes. Victoria frowned slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the environment, but her steps did not falter. I knew this was just the prelude to a storm. The real confrontation would officially begin at the family dinner table in 10 minutes, and from that moment on, my fate and that of this Wall Street queen were completely intertwined. The car drove away from the old apartment area and headed north, eventually stopping in front of a well-known seafood restaurant in the Boston suburbs. The restaurant was designed in a standard detached American manor style, surrounded by neatly manicured lawns, and the huge parking lot in front was filled with various luxury cars, creating a stark visual contrast to the cramped neighborhood we had lived in before. Tonight is a family dinner organized by my Uncle Robert. Ostensibly, it's to celebrate his son, my cousin Mark, getting excellent grades at Boston University's business school. But in reality, the whole family knows it's a trap specifically set for my mother and me. In the past few years, since my father passed away and the family's fortunes declined, Robert's family has become the central figures in the family, while my mother and I have become the targets for everyone to boast about and belittle. I turned my head and glanced at Victoria beside me. She was slowly wiping her long, slender fingers with a wet wipe, her expression indifferent, as if she were facing not a group of mean relatives tonight, but just a boring business negotiation. "Once we go in, my uncle might have a very foul mouth," I whispered to her as I unbuckled my seatbelt. "If you regret it now, it's not too late. I can go in and face it alone." Victoria stopped what she was doing, glanced at me sideways with her gray-blue eyes, and parted her red lips slightly. "Taylor Stern, do you have some misunderstanding about my mental fortitude? Or do you think that I, a dignified head of Wall Street capital, would be intimidated by a few country bumpkins who can't even understand the Nasdaq index?" She paused, then took my arm again, her tone carrying an undeniable force. "Remember our agreement. Tonight, I'm your fiancé. I'll not only help you get revenge, but I'll also let them know that the woman standing beside you is someone they can never hope to be near." Seeing her decisive and efficient demeanor, a weight lifted from my shoulders. Taking a deep breath, I opened the car door and led Victoria through the restaurant's opulent entrance. A waiter led us through the spacious hall to a large private room by the window. The room was already full. My Uncle Robert, holding a glass of soda, was chatting animatedly with several relatives beside him, a broad smile on his face. My Aunt Mary, wearing an expensive diamond necklace, was holding my mother's hand, outwardly offering words of concern but her tone dripping with condescension. As for my cousin Mark, he was leaning back in his leather chair, fiddling with the latest smartphone, his eyes filled with disdain. Oh, our top-performing analyst has finally arrived. The first to notice us was my aunt, who was sitting in the corner. She gave a sarcastic laugh, her gaze sweeping over me before finally settling on Victoria beside me. Oh, you brought a female companion today, Taylor? You usually can't even get a permanent position as an intern at the company. Renting such a pretty girl to make a scene. It must have cost a lot of money for one night. Right, these young people nowadays. They'll do anything for vanity. As soon as my aunt said that, laughter erupted in the private room. Mary also let go of my mother's hand and gave me a forced smile. Taylor, I'm not trying to be mean, but your cousin Mark just got a job offer from a top company this year, with a starting salary of 6 figures. And you? You're always looking disheveled at the company. And you can't even bring home a decent girlfriend. Today you finally brought home a new face. But I hope it's not some extra you hired on the street for $20? The mother's face turned deathly pale instantly. Her hands clenched tightly together. Her lips trembled slightly. And she wanted to speak but didn't know what to say. She had been an honest and simple person all her life and was most afraid of losing face in front of these relatives. I was about to retort in a cold voice when Victoria, who was beside me, moved first. She didn't even glance at her aunt who had spoken, but instead slightly turned her head, sweeping her gaze across everyone in the private room with an extremely elegant yet chilling look. The aura of a superior, honed over years in the battlefield of capital, instantly spread like a tide, and the temperature in the entire private room seemed to drop several degrees. An extra? Victoria smiled dismissively, her voice not loud, but clear enough to reach everyone's ears. Madam, if I remember correctly, that counterfeit Chanel jacket you're wearing was bought at a cheap outlet mall in South Boston, wasn't it? Using a fake worth a few $100s. Yet you're here criticizing the founder of a multinational corporation. Who gave you the audacity? The eldest aunt's face flushed crimson, her facial muscles twitching violently. She pointed at Victoria and screamed, "Who do you think you are? How dare you speak to your elders like that? Taylor, is this the wild girl you found? Don't you know how to respect your elders and care for the young? Respecting the elderly and caring for the young requires that the other party be a human being, not a group of parasites who only seek a sense of existence by belittling others," I replied coldly, shielding Victoria behind me, my gaze sweeping over everyone present like a knife. "Auntie, weren't you curious about who this is? Well then, let me formally introduce her. This is Ms. Victoria Vanderbilt, the head of Vanderbilt Capital, and also my, Taylor Stern's, rightful fiancé." The previously noisy discussion in the private room came to an abrupt halt. Everyone stared at us blankly, like ducks with their necks grabbed. Robert's smile froze completely. He put down his cup, rubbed his eyes in disbelief, and stammered, Vanderbilt? Taylor, what kind of international joke are you talking about? You, a low-level analyst earning a meager salary every month, can possibly be on par with the head of the Boston conglomerate? Do you think everyone is a fool? Am I joking? You can check the NASDAQ news release about Vanderbilt Capital this afternoon. Victoria tightened her grip on my arm again, leaning forward slightly, her eyes radiating a suffocating pressure. "Mr. Robert, as far as I know, your family's logistics company currently has a $3 million bank loan due. Right, if I'm not mistaken. The largest individual shareholder of that bank happens to have a seat on our company's board of directors." Robert's face instantly turned from red to white, and fine beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. He never imagined that this excessively young woman could actually know the lifeblood of his company's business so clearly. "What? What exactly do you want?" Robert's tone finally panicked, and the arrogant condescension from before was gone. Victoria gave him a cold glance, a cruel yet elegant smile curving her lips. "I don't want to do anything. I just think that since today is a family dinner, shouldn't we settle some scores one by one?" The air in the private room seemed to freeze completely. Looking at the decisive woman beside me, I felt an unprecedented sense of satisfaction. These vampire-like relatives had finally met their destined nemesis. The air in the private room seemed to have been sucked out, so oppressive that it was hard to breathe. Robert's previously arrogant face was now paler than paper. He opened his mouth, but couldn't utter a single complete syllable. That $3 million bank loan was the lifeblood of their entire family business. If the loan was withdrawn, bankruptcy liquidation would be their only fate. "What? Where did your confidence go when you were mocking us at the door?" I took a step forward, put my hands in my suit pockets, and looked down at this uncle who had kicked me when I was down after my father's death. "Robert, didn't you always look down on my son and me as a burden on society? Why don't you even dare to say anything now?" My cousin Mark finally couldn't sit still any longer. He stood up abruptly, his face ashen, and pointed at me, shouting, "Taylor, stop trying to intimidate me. Do you really think you can swagger around just because you've hooked up with some random woman you found somewhere?" "Dad, Don't listen to this good-for-nothing's nonsense. She can't possibly be the president of Vanderbilt Capital. Everyone in America knows that big shot is young, beautiful, and incredibly powerful. How could she possibly be interested in a lowly employee like him who gets yelled at every day at the company? Mark's hysteria elicited agreement from the other relatives in the box. His aunt, having recovered her composure, shrieked, "That's right. Mark's right. Taylor, you've been a liar your whole life. Today, to save face in front of your elders, you even hired an actor to help you put on a show. You two get out of here right now. You're not welcome." Faced with the doubts and insults of the crowd, I didn't even flinch. This desperate reaction was entirely within my expectations. The narrow-mindedness of those at the bottom always leads them to choose blind questioning as an escape from reality. Victoria scoffed. Not bothering to waste a single word on these ignorant fools, she pulled a pure black, custom-made business card from her purse, casually tucked it between her slender fingers, and flicked it lightly. The card traced a graceful arc in the air before landing precisely in the center of Robert's plate. Robert reached out with trembling hands and picked up the business card. One glance was enough to send his legs trembling violently, nearly causing him to drop the card. As a small to medium-sized business owner who frequently dealt with local Boston banks, he knew all too well what this black and gold business card represented. It was a symbol of a top executive at a major American financial giant, made of a special carbon fiber material that was impossible to counterfeit. "Mr. Robert, it seems your IQ is just as worrisome as your son's." Victoria picked up the warm water on the table, took a small sip, and spoke as calmly as if she were discussing the weather. "If you think this business card is fake, you can take out your phone right now and call the president of Boston Commercial Bank's private number, and ask him if I have the right to immediately turn your company's loan into a bad debt with just a word." Robert's phone slipped from his hand and fell to the carpet with a thud. He slumped into his chair, large beads of sweat rolling down his forehead. He finally realized that the stunningly beautiful woman before him was not just an extra, but held absolute power of life and death over them, capable of bankrupting their entire family in an instant. "Uncle, weren't you quite the chatterbox just now?" I bent down, picked up the phone from the floor, and placed it on the table in front of Robert. "Keep talking. Calling me a good-for-nothing and my mother a parasite. Why are you mute now?" Robert's face turned a deep purplish red, his lips trembling. He wanted to beg for mercy but was too proud to do so. Seeing this, Aunt Mary's expression instantly changed. She plastered a fawning, ugly smile on her face, rushed to my mother's side, grabbed her hand, and cried out, "Martha, we're family after all. It was all my fault before. I was so gossipy and said such hurtful things. Please, for the sake of our family ties, let Miss Victoria be merciful and let us off the hook." Looking at Mary's ugly face, so different before and after, I felt nauseous. This is what they call family ties, thin as a piece of waste paper in the face of absolute capital and profit. My mother moved her lips, a hint of reluctance flashing in her eyes. She was always soft-hearted and couldn't bear to see others weeping in front of her. But I knew that if I let these vampires go easily today, they would bully my mother and me even more severely in the future. I was about to refuse when Victoria spoke first, saying calmly, "Auntie, business is business. Since they had the audacity to humiliate your son in front of you, they should be prepared to bear the consequences. On Wall Street, there is no such thing as a mistake that goes unpunished." She turned her head, her gaze sweeping across the room like a knife. "Starting today, all bank credit lines for Robert's Logistics Company are cancelled. In addition, I will withdraw all of Mark's internship recommendation letters from Boston University's business school on behalf of the board. If you want to make a living and have relationships in Boston, you first need to learn how to be a person." Mark's face turned deathly pale. His legs gave way, and he collapsed to the ground. The six-figure salary job he had secured through family connections at a prestigious company had now vanished completely. "No, you can't do this. You're going to kill us all," Mark cried out in despair, to drive them to their wits' end. I looked at him coldly. "Compared to the mental torture and humiliation you've inflicted on my mother over the past few years, this is just interest." The relatives in the private room didn't dare to utter a sound. Their eyes filled with fear as they looked at Victoria and me. Those who had originally planned to join in the commotion now wished they could bury their heads in their plates, afraid of attracting the attention of this female CEO. Victoria stood up gracefully, straightened the hem of her coat, and looked down at the ashen-faced Roberts and their family. "Taylor, the show is over. The air here makes me feel very uncomfortable. Let's go." "Okay." I nodded and took her hand again. In the deathly silence of the room, Victoria and I walked out of the private box side by side. From the luxurious restaurant behind us, we could faintly hear Robert's tearful roars and Mary's screams. But all of that was no longer relevant to us. The tense atmosphere eased slightly the moment I sat in the back seat of the Rolls-Royce. The windows blocked out the outside noise, and the interior was filled with a faint scent of cedarwood. I turned to look at Victoria beside me and couldn't help but tease her. "Ms. Victoria, your acting today was Oscar-worthy. You not only completely subdued my relative, but also helped me vent my anger. I don't know how to thank you enough." Victoria leaned back in her chair, her eyes slightly closed. But there was no trace of triumph on her face. She opened her cool, gray-blue eyes, turned to look at me, and her tone returned to its professional, businesslike tone. Taylor, don't think of me as too kind. I did this not only to help you, but also to prove my worth to you. Now that we're in a relationship, you'd better not disappoint me about what you promised me this afternoon. Don't worry, I said, my smile fading in a sharp glint in my eyes. I've got pretty much all the dirty tricks Blake pulled in the Texas shale oil acquisition deal. Tomorrow, as soon as we get to work, we'll officially launch our counterattack against Blake. Victoria looked at my confident demeanor, a barely perceptible smile curving her lips. Very good, Taylor. I'm starting to look forward to the show tomorrow morning. But before that, tonight's pretense of being a couple isn't over yet. How are you planning to take me home? I paused for a moment, looking into her eyes that seemed to see through everything, and then suddenly smiled. Since he's my fiancé, of course I should personally escort the future company boss back to his residence safely, and also discuss tomorrow's battle plan. The Rolls-Royce slowly started and blended into the Boston night traffic. I knew that the victory at the family dinner was just the beginning. Tomorrow I would face a huge workplace trap set by the company's vice president, Blake, and my collaboration with this icy female CEO had only just begun to unveil the most thrilling part. Boston mornings always carry a chilly, somber feel. As the morning light pierced the clouds and illuminated the towering glass facades of the financial district, I stepped through the doors of the Vanderbilt Capitol building precisely on time, using my 8:30 access card. Compared to usual, the atmosphere in the office was unusually heavy today. Several analysts in the hallway glanced at me with strange glints in their eyes, a mixture of gloating probing and deliberate distancing. Clearly, the news of my harsh criticism of the Robert family at yesterday's family dinner hadn't even had a chance to fully develop within the company. But an even bigger storm was already brewing within the workplace. As soon as I entered the open plan office area of the risk assessment department, Jack, Vice President Blake's confidant and assistant, walked over with a cold smile, carrying a thick stack of printed financial statements. Jack, who was in his early 30s, usually bullied the department by relying on Blake's influence, and his favorite thing to do was to appropriate the hard work of the lower-level employees. Hey, isn't this our top analyst Taylor? Jack slammed the stack of documents onto my desk with a sarcastic tone, kicking up a fine layer of dust. I heard you were doing pretty well outside yesterday, even handling your relatives' dinner party with ease. But Taylor, don't blame me for not warning you. Work-related messes can't be solved by bragging outside. Without even lifting my eyelids, I slowly turned on the computer and asked in a flat tone, Jack, just say what you want to say. Stop with the sarcasm. Who upset you so early in the morning? Or is Blake putting too much pressure on you, making you come here so early to seek attention? Jack's cheek twitched slightly, a flash of savage anger crossing his eyes. He snorted coldly, crossed his arms, and stared down at me condescendingly. You little punk, still being stubborn even when you're about to die. You know about the Texas shale oil acquisition project we were in charge of last month. Right. Now the audit department has suddenly intervened and discovered serious financial loopholes in that risk assessment report, putting the entire project at risk of $30 million in bad debts. He took a sudden step forward, his voice rising abruptly to draw the attention of everyone in the office. And the final signatory of that report is none other than your name, Taylor Stern. Vice President Black is currently throwing a tantrum in the main conference room, and the board has already sent people to investigate. Taylor, this time you're not only going to be fired, you might also face legal consequences for commercial fraud. Upon hearing this, my colleagues erupted in an uproar. They whispered amongst themselves, their gazes instantly filled with pity and disdain. On Wall Street, being accused of commercial fraud is essentially a death sentence for your career. No financial institution will ever dare to hire you again. Commercial fraud? I chuckled softly, looking up at Jack's smug face. Jack, are you having a bad memory? Before this report was finalized last month, I submitted written risk warnings to Vice President Black 3 times, pointing out the hidden debt traps within. But who was it that tore up my warning report and forced me to change the final risk rating from high risk to low risk? Jack's expression changed slightly, but he quickly regained his composure and grinned maliciously. Taylor, you can't just say whatever you want. Do you have any evidence? In all the meeting minutes and system submissions, the person who ultimately approved them is you, Taylor Stern. Words are no proof. The board only recognizes documents, not people. Even if you kneel down and beg Vice President Blake now, it won't save you. Looking at Jack's smug and despicable face, I sneered inwardly. Blake's move was indeed ruthless. He not only wanted to use me as a scapegoat to get fired, but also wanted to completely ruin my reputation, ensuring I could never recover. Unfortunately for him, they overlooked one thing. Last night, Victoria and I reviewed the underlying data logic of the entire project and obtained the most crucial evidence of the non-public trust. Since Vice President Blake is so eager to hold a meeting to interrogate me, let's go to the main conference room now. I stood up from my chair, straightened my suit and tie, and showed no sign of panic. Instead, I had a calmness that sent chills down Jack's spine. Jack was slightly taken aback, seemingly not expecting me to still be able to laugh at this point. But then he thought about it and realized I was just putting on a brave face. He sneered viciously. "Fine, you fool. I'll see how stubborn you can be once you're in the conference room." A few minutes later, the large conference room on the top floor of the building was packed. At the far end of the long mahogany conference table, Blake sat imposingly in the head seat. He was 40 years old, with a meticulously slicked back hairstyle, and a sharp, shrewd glint emanated from behind his gold-rimmed glasses. Upon seeing Jack and me enter, Blake immediately adopted a pained, indignant leadership posture, slamming his hand heavily on the table. "Taylor Stern, you have disappointed me greatly." Blake's deep and authoritative voice instantly drew everyone's attention. "The company has always treated you well. Yet you committed fraud in the Texas shale oil acquisition, concealing a staggering $30 million in hidden debt. Do you know how much reputational damage this mistake has caused the company? Today, in front of the audit department and all the board members, what do you have to say?" Several senior executives from the audit department sitting next to Blake also frowned, their eyes full of questions as they looked at me. "Vice President Blake, your ability to turn the tables on others is as masterful as ever." I ignored his roar and walked steadily to the conference table, pulled out a chair and sat down. "However, before you convict me, shouldn't you first show everyone the original risk control modification log that you deliberately concealed?" A flicker of barely perceptible panic flashed in Blake's eyes, but he maintained a tough exterior and coldly retorted, "What original log? Taylor, are you still trying to fabricate evidence to frame someone? The audit department has already checked all the system traces, and there is absolutely no log modification. Is that so?" I sneered, turning to glance at the closed conference room door. "What if you secretly deleted the system traces last night using your administrator privileges? Blake, do you think you're truly foolproof just because you cleared the firewall?" "Outrageous." Blake stood up abruptly, his face ashen, and roared at me. "Taylor, you are suspected of serious misconduct and commercial fraud. I hereby officially announce that you are fired. Security, throw this bastard out." Two burly security guards immediately entered from outside, approaching me menacingly. The tension in the entire conference room reached its peak. Everyone thought I was doomed this time. Just as the two security guards were about to reach out and grab my shoulders, the heavy double solid wood doors of the conference room were pushed open from the outside with a bang. A powerful and icy aura instantly swept through the entire room. Everyone present instinctively stood up the moment they saw the newcomer, not daring to utter a sound. The newcomer was none other than Victoria. Today, she wore a sharply tailored, pure white Chanel haute couture suit and black high heels, each step seemingly coinciding with the heartbeats of everyone present. Her gray-blue eyes swept across the room before finally settling steadily on Blake, whose expression had drastically changed. "Vice President Black, what an air of authority," Victoria spoke coldly as she walked straight to the head of the table. "I had no idea that Vanderbilt Capital had ever given you, a vice president, the power to arbitrarily fire core analysts." A cold sweat instantly beaded on Blake's forehead. He forced an awkward smile and stammered, "President Victoria, why have you come in person? This Taylor is suspected of serious commercial fraud. For the company's benefit, I must act immediately." "Shut up." Victoria didn't even look at him directly. She pulled out a chair and sat down, her long fingers tapping lightly on the mahogany table. "Jack, turn on the projector. Project the real acquisition report that Taylor sent me last night, which has already passed the national-level financial security audit and been filed, onto the big screen." Jack stood to the side, his legs beginning to tremble uncontrollably. He instinctively turned to look at Blake, only to find that Blake's face had turned paler than a corpse. The moment the large screen lit up, it clearly displayed the final equity penetration chart of the Texas Shale Oil Seller Company, and in the most crucial column of hidden debt beneficiaries, a familiar name was prominently displayed, Blake Lincoln's Offshore Trust Fund. The entire conference room fell into a deathly silence. All the executives gasped as they stared at the evidence on the screen. The truth was revealed in an instant. It wasn't me who was suspected of fraud, but rather Blake who, in order to line his own pocket, colluded with external sellers to falsify accounts, attempting to pin a hidden $30 million debt on me to cover up his embezzlement. Blake's legs went weak, and he slumped into the chair, his gold-rimmed glasses sliding off his nose and shattering on the floor with a crack. He opened his mouth, but no more words of explanation came out. I turned to look at Victoria beside me, who stood as proud and aloof as a queen, and a surge of unprecedented exhilaration welled up inside me. The first wave of my workplace counterattack had been a resounding victory. Now, the real moment for a thorough reckoning with Blake would begin. The atmosphere in the large conference room was as oppressive as the sea before a storm. On the huge projection screen, the equity penetration code for the Black and Decker Offshore Trust Fund was like invisible thorns, piercing the eyes of every executive present. Blake slumped into the leather armchair next to the head of the table. His once meticulously slicked back hair was now disheveled, with a few greasy strands sticking to his sweat-drenched forehead. His usually arrogant face was now deathly pale, his lips trembling violently, and his eyes staring blankly at the ground, as if he had aged 10 years in just a few minutes. Vice President Blake. Victoria leaned back in her chair, her long, slender fingers tapping lightly on the mahogany table, producing a series of crisp, rhythmic sounds. Now, do you have anything else to explain to the audit department and the board of directors regarding this $30 million embezzlement and transfer of benefits? Are you planning to write a detailed confession now, or wait for the FBI to come directly to the company to talk to you? Upon hearing the words FBI, Blake's mental defenses completely crumbled. He abruptly stood up from his chair, his legs buckled, and in front of dozens of senior executives and key employees, he knelt down with a thud in front of Victoria's desk. President Victoria, I was wrong. I was blinded by greed and did such a foolish thing. Blake disregarded dignity and propriety, wailing with snot and tears streaming down his face, even crawling on his knees to grab Victoria's skirt. Please, for the sake of my many years of service to the company, please don't call the police. If the FBI gets involved, my life will be over. Victoria frowned in disgust, pulled her legs back in a gesture of disdain, and looked at him with an icy gaze. If you knew this would happen, why did you do it in the first place? When you colluded with outside sellers to falsify accounts and tried to push Taylor out as a scapegoat to ruin his entire career, did you ever think that this day would come? After saying that, she turned her head slightly and looked at Jack, who was standing to the side, his face ashen and his whole body trembling. Upon seeing this, Jack was terrified. His legs went weak and he knelt on the ground, desperately kowtowing and begging for mercy with a sob in his voice. President, spare me. This was all forced upon me by Blake. I was just a lowly assistant who followed orders. All the falsification of accounts and alteration of documents was Blake's doing. It had nothing to do with me. None of your business? I sneered and took a step forward, looking down at Jack kneeling on the ground. Jack, where did that arrogant air of yours go when you slammed the documents on my desk in the open plan office this morning? And when you were helping Blake commit perjury in the conference room just now, and you wanted to fire me right away, didn't you realize you were just a gopher? Jack's face turned pale. He opened his mouth, but I silenced him with my retort. He could only keep slapping himself, making a series of crisp slapping sounds. All right. Victoria raised her hand, stopping the farce. She coldly swept her gaze across all the executives in the conference room, her voice carrying through the microphone to every corner. Effective immediately, the vice president of Blake Corporation is dismissed from all positions and permanently banned from the company. Jack is suspected of colluding in a job-related crime, and all evidence of Blake's illegal activities is immediately transferred to the Boston Local Police and the Commercial Crime Bureau. At the same time, the Audit Department will immediately conduct a comprehensive overhaul of the Risk Assessment Department, and all personnel involved in this matter will be suspended pending investigation. Several security personnel and the company's legal counsel, who had been waiting outside, quickly entered. Expressionless, they grabbed the limp Blake and Jack, one on each side, and dragged them out of the conference room like dead dogs. As Blake's desperate cries faded into the distance, this premeditated workplace trap was finally and utterly shattered in the face of overwhelming evidence and overwhelming power. A tense silence filled the conference room. Those executives who had previously fawned over Blake and even joined in the jeers, watching me humiliate, now all hung their heads, not daring to utter a sound, their eyes filled with awe and fear. They finally understood that this seemingly unassuming, composed, and hardworking young analyst not only possessed a terrifying mind capable of seeing through any business trap, but also had a powerful backer whom even the company president favored and relied upon. Meeting adjourned. Victoria stood up, her tone brief and forceful. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief and filed out. In the blink of an eye, only Victoria and I remained in the spacious conference room. Sunlight streamed in through the huge floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a soft glow on Victoria's exquisite and aloof face. She turned around, her gray-blue eyes gazing at me silently, a subtle, enigmatic smile suddenly curving her lips. Taylor Stern, Victoria said, arms crossed, as she slowly walked up to me in her high heels, a hint of teasing in her voice. Blake's been dealt with. Your biggest obstacle in the company has been completely removed. Now, not only does no one dare to question your abilities anymore, but the board is even considering promoting you to the new director of the Risk Assessment Department. Shouldn't you thank your fake girlfriend? Looking at her exquisite face so close to mine, and smelling the faint scent of cedarwood perfume in the air, I was overwhelmed with mixed emotions. From that high-stakes gamble when I first entered her office, to last night's thrilling family dinner, and this morning's desperate counterattack that sent the villain to prison, this seemingly cold and ruthless female CEO and I had already gone through countless life-or-death battles. Ms. Victoria, I said, my playful expression vanishing, my gaze turning unusually serious. Of course I thank you. However, I recall our agreement stating that this was only a temporary pretense of being a couple. Now that the die is cast, shouldn't you, as a Wall Street president, Step back from this charade? Upon hearing this, Victoria's smile faded slightly, and a glint of unfathomable light flashed in her gray-blue eyes. She took a small step forward, so close that they could almost feel each other's breath. Taylor, do you really think anything in the adult world can just start and end so easily? Victoria's voice was low, with a penetrating force that struck straight to the heart. Last night, I sent the photos to your mother, and the entire business world in Boston knows that you are the man Taylor Stern, have chosen. Now you want to just pack up and leave, leaving me all alone with this mess? I was stunned for a moment, then looked at her with a mix of amusement and exasperation. How can this be called a mess? You clearly stirred things up yourself. Besides, a business queen like you can find any kind of talented young man. Why would you want to tie yourself to someone like me who just crawled out of the mud? Because they don't have your ruthlessness, nor your ability to see the big picture even in dire situations. Victoria gently straightened my slightly wrinkled suit collar with her slender fingers, her movements so tender they were a stark contrast to her usual aloofness. Taylor, although Blake is in jail, his deep-rooted influence in Boston's business world hasn't been completely eradicated. And, what about your mother? She paused, a barely perceptible tenderness flashing in her eyes. Your mother called me this morning, inviting me, her future daughter-in-law, to her home for a casual meal this weekend, and to personally cook Boston lobster for me. Taylor, what do you think I should say to her? Looking at the woman before me, who had shed her cold, ruthless exterior as a business queen and occasionally revealed a touch of girlish tenderness, my last line of defense completely crumbled. In this cold, calculating city where everyone is scheming against each other, only this woman has accompanied me step by step as I trampled those enemies who had once trampled on our dignity, giving me a sense of security I had never felt before in my life with the most absolute demeanor. Okay, I took a deep breath, and reached out my right hand to gently grasp her cool, slender hand. Since we're going to my mom's for lobster this weekend, starting today, I not only don't plan to resign from this fiancé role, but I'm also going to apply for a lifetime contract. President Victoria, you should think this through carefully. Once you sign this lifetime contract, there's no going back. Victoria gripped my hand tightly, a radiant and captivating smile blooming on her lips, the brightest and most beautiful smile she'd had since firing Blake. At that moment, the Boston sun shone brightly outside the window, dispelling the city's gloom. Our legend was just beginning. On a weekend in the Boston suburbs, the sun shone brightly, and golden autumn leaves adorned the streets like an oil painting. The air was filled with the fragrance of earth and fallen leaves, accompanied by the occasional bark of a dog in the distance, creating an atmosphere of extraordinary tranquility and peace. I was driving my brand new black SUV, with Victoria, dressed casually, in the passenger seat. Unusually, she wasn't wearing her usual sharp, formal business suit today. Instead, she wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater, her long hair loosely draped over her shoulders. She exuded less of the aloofness of a Wall Street CEO and more of a girl-next-door charm and gentle grace. Even so, her exquisitely beautiful profile and innate elegance still drew frequent glances from passers-by. Taylor, are you sure your aunt will like my Boston lobster? Victoria turned her head, a rare hint of nervousness in her gray-blue eyes. I'm used to being decisive and efficient at the company, so I'm not really confident when it comes to cooking. If your aunt doesn't like it later, you'll have to smooth things over for me. Seeing this ice queen who dominates Wall Street and drives countless financial tycoons to the brink of ruin, now feeling uneasy about meeting my mother, I couldn't help but chuckle. Don't worry, President Victoria. In my mother's eyes, you're not some billionaire tycoon. She just sees you as her future daughter-in-law. Besides, whatever you cook, even if you put too much salt in, my mother will praise you for your skill. Victoria rolled her eyes at me, then gently pinched my arm with her slender fingers, scolding, Well, Taylor, you're getting bolder and bolder, even daring to tease me now. Believe me or not, I'll demote you tomorrow and make you rewrite the most basic risk assessment report. Come on, Director Victoria, I said with a smile, taking her slightly cool hand and intertwining our fingers. The board of directors just officially approved my appointment yesterday. I'm now the company's youngest risk control director. If you want to fire me, you'll have to ask those old men on the board if they'll agree. The car slowly drove into that familiar old neighborhood and finally stopped in front of our old apartment building. Unlike when we returned in a sorry state last week, the air today seemed to be filled with the scent of victory and joy. As we approached the apartment door, the wooden door creaked open from the inside. My mother, Martha, wearing an apron and holding a spatula, greeted us with a broad smile. When she saw Victoria and me walking hand in hand, her eyes crinkled with joy. Oh, Victoria's here. Come in, come in. It's windy outside. The mother warmly took Victoria's hand, looking her up and down at the business tycoon she usually only saw on television news. There was no restraint or fear in her eyes, only the heartfelt love and joy of an elder for a younger generation. This child is really handsome, even more so than in the photos. Taylor is usually so dull. Finding such an excellent wife like you is truly a blessing from his past life. A slight blush rose on Victoria's cheeks, and her originally cool gaze softened considerably. She obediently replied, "Auntie, you flatter me. Actually, Taylor is exceptionally talented at the company and takes good care of me at work. I'm the one who's lucky to be with him." Listening to Victoria's blatantly blatant lies and seemingly genuine concern, I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. If her former competitors, whom she had fired or terrified of, heard this, they would be utterly astonished. It turns out that even the ruthless businesswoman has such a gentle and amiable side. Stepping into the house, although the space was small, it was spotless. A table full of sumptuous American home-style dishes was already laid out on the dining table, with a large plate of Boston lobster emitting an enticing aroma prominently displayed in the center. This was the result of Victoria having it flown in advance and cooking it herself. Just as we were about to wash our hands and sit down, there was a sudden, urgent, and somewhat panicked knocking on the door. I frowned slightly, walked over, and opened the door. Standing outside were several extremely disheveled figures: my Uncle Robert, Aunt Mary, and Cousin Mark. The Robert family, now completely devoid of the arrogant swagger they displayed at the upscale restaurant the previous week, were a far cry from their earlier demeanor. Robert's clothes were wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes were filled with despair and exhaustion. Mary and Mark, heads bowed, didn't dare utter a sound. Because of Victoria's previous ruthless actions, their logistics company had not only faced complete loan defaults and bankruptcy liquidation, but Mark's job had also been completely lost, and even their house had been seized by the bank due to a broken cash flow. With nowhere else to turn, they had no choice but to swallow their pride and come here, placing their last hopes on my mother and me. Taylor! Taylor! Robert's legs went weak when he saw me, and he almost knelt down in front of me in the hallway. It was all my fault before. Uncle is a bastard. He didn't know how to recognize a great man. Please, for the sake of our family ties, ask President Victoria to be merciful and spare our lives. If the bank takes our house, our whole family will be left homeless." Mary, wiping away tears, clung to the doorframe, sobbing and pleading, "Martha, we're family. We're siblings. You can't just stand by and watch us die. Please talk to Taylor and Victoria and ask them to let us go this time." Hearing the commotion, my mother inside wiped her hands and came over. When she saw my uncle's family, who had once been so arrogant and humiliating towards us, now reduced to such a state, a complex emotion flashed in her eyes. My mother was kind-hearted and believed in forgiveness all her life. Seeing this scene, she opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something. I coldly stared at the group of vampires outside the door, who had once wanted to crush us into the mud, without a shred of sympathy, when they were kicking me when I was down and wantonly trampling on my mother's and my dignity. Did they ever imagine this day would come? "Uncle, Aunt," I said, arms crossed, my tone calm and utterly unwavering. "Last week at the seafood restaurant, didn't you ever imagine you'd end up like this? The business world has its rules, and families have their bottom lines. Since you chose to measure family ties with capital and snobbery, then when capital turns against you, you should bear the corresponding consequences. You are not welcome here. Please leave." Robert's face turned a deep purplish red, but he couldn't utter a single word in rebuttal. He knew that the only ones who could save their lives were the two young people inside. He desperately turned his gaze to Victoria, who was standing behind me, and then collapsed to his knees on the porch carpet. Victoria didn't even lift her eyelids. She walked gracefully to my side, naturally taking my arm, her gray-blue eyes revealing a cold and arrogant glint. "Mr. Robert," Victoria's voice was cold and clear, echoing in the narrow hallway. "Taylor's meaning is my meaning. In Boston, no one can bully Taylor and get away unscathed. If you don't leave, I don't mind having the Commercial Crime Bureau send your whole family to federal prison for contract fraud so you can reflect on your actions." Upon hearing the words federal prison, Robert was terrified and didn't dare linger for even a second. He scrambled to his feet, grabbed a distraught Mary and Mark, and fled the old apartment building like stray dogs, never daring to look back. Watching their fleeing figures, Mother let out a soft sigh, turned around, and walked back to the kitchen, wiping away her tears. She said with a smile, "All right, the irrelevant people are gone. Let's eat. No one is allowed to bring up those unpleasant things today." Victoria and I exchanged a knowing smile and walked side by side back to the table to take our seats. The sunlight outside happened to fall right in the center of the dining table, casting a warm glow over the lobster on the plate. Mother ladled out 2 bowls of steaming hot soup for us, her face radiating a happiness and peace we had never seen before. Victoria gently picked up her chopsticks, skillfully and naturally placed a tender piece of shrimp meat into my bowl, a hint of captivating tenderness in her eyes and brows. Having weathered the cutthroat storms of the corporate world and the cold mockery of my family in Boston, a city brimming with both opportunity and ruthlessness, I finally used my cunning and joined forces with the stunningly cold and elegant female CEO beside me to complete the ultimate rise from a grassroots underdog to a master player in the business world. As the sun set, its afterglow stretched the shadows of the two of us long and far. Life was just beginning, and our future shone with dazzling starlight. And thank you for listening. Please subscribe, like, share, and comment. Thank you.